week we're making a Precursor orb from the video game Jak and Daxter, which was actually the first video game I ever managed to beat. Yeah, I'm not very good at video games. Anyway, I love this thing. I think it's so pretty. I just need 89 more and then I can buy a power cell, or 119 more and I can get one from the creepy oracle statues. Anyway, for this week, here's what you need. A couple of blown out eggshells that are completely dry. Copper polymer clay. Silver polymer clay. A stitch ripper, or a pointy and ball tool. Rubbing alcohol. A ton of Q-tips. A paintbrush, black acrylic paint. A container to mix water and paint in. And Mod Podge, or whatever you like to glaze with. Now I recommend having more than one eggshell on hand because sometimes this is going to happen. Just kind of have to shrug and start over. Then take your copper polymer clay, knead it until it is soft and uniform, and then start sticking tiny thin chunks onto your eggshell, using your fingers to smooth out the chunks and keeping them pretty thin. You don't want this to be a thick layer. Once you have a decent number of chunks attached to your eggshell, you can actually start smoothing out the various lines. You're going to do this for the whole eggshell once you're completely covered, but it's good to kind of do it as you go just because it makes the final task a lot easier in the end. To get rid of any bumps that are left over, you're going to take a piece of scrap cloth and some rubbing alcohol and start rubbing down the egg to smooth out any and all imperfections. Now, along with this process, try to make sure that the two holes on either end of the egg from when you blew it out are still open. You don't want to cover those or else your egg can explode or implode. While the first layer is baking, go ahead and take out some silver polymer clay and then add it to some copper polymer clay to make a lighter copper color. You don't want this to be too silver, just light enough that you can really tell the difference between the first layer and the second layer. Once you have a color you like and it is nice and uniform, go ahead and repeat the same steps you did for the first layer to the second layer, only don't smooth it out with alcohol and don't bake it. Once your second layer is completely covering your egg and it's pretty smooth, I like to roll it around in my hands just to make sure, go ahead and take your egg and set it aside for at least a half hour to let the polymer clay cool down and firm up a little bit. Once your polymer clay is cooled down, you're going to want to take a measuring tape or a piece of string, run it over the widest section of polymer clay, and then mark 4 evenly spaced marks in the polymer clay. At that point, you're going to want to take the pointy end of your stitch ripper tool and draw the jagged line that is across the bottom of the Precursor orb. It'll make a lot more sense when you see the texture that I linked to below. Once you like the line across the egg, go ahead and take the ball end of the stitch ripper and follow that same line, making a much deeper, thicker line. While doing that, use your fingers to even out any of the tear marks or seams that appear. Just try and keep the edges as smooth as possible while at the same time refining that edge with that ball tool. Once you like your jagged line, you're going to want to put 6 marks on the egg that are evenly spaced below the line, so on the wider end of the egg. From there, draw your letters over the 6 evenly spaced marks. I did this by just staring at the texture that I linked to below. Use the pointy end of the tool to just draw rough outlines. The goal is not to get these perfect. It's mostly just to check the spacing on the letters so that you know they all look right together before making the mark more permanent. From there, take your stitch ripper and start emptying out anything that is inside your outlines. I just use the pointy end and the ball tool to clean it out as best I can, and then flatten down the edges with my finger, and then use the ball tool to refine the edges. Eventually, it should look like this. From there, just repeat that process with the top letters. There are 8 of those letters. They're a little bit smaller and there are some repeats from the bottom, so do try and keep them looking even. Now for me, the first thing I had to do was smooth out the top of my egg because a bunch of extra clay had gathered there. So if you have that like me, just smooth it out with your thumb, take off any of the extra before you start carving the letters. At that point, just start carving the letters and repeat the process you did to the bottom to get them all nice and smooth. Now, to be completely honest, that wiggle at the top of the egg was the hardest thing of this entire process. I ended up just taking my stitch ripper, doing 2 lines that were both a little bit far away from the edge to look like they were spaced right, and then just trying to draw the wiggle between the 2 lines over and over and over again until I actually managed to make a symmetrical wiggle. I don't have any tips, the whole process sucked. The most I can really say is remember, each mistake isn't permanent. until you start gouging it out with the ball tool. So just keep refining and trying to get it right. And yes, it looks really crappy at this point, but you know what? That's what fingers are for, and any leftover scrap clay can fix a million things. Just keep refining the edges and then flattening out everything to the best of your ability with your fingers and you should be fine. Once you like the look of your carvings, it's time to clean everything. Take a Q-tip, dip one end in alcohol, leave the other end dry, and start rubbing the inside of each carving with the wet end, and then sopping up any extra liquid with the dry end. Then take a wet Q-tip and rub the rest of the surface of the egg, trying to get rid of any and all fingerprints. This is going to be a little hard since it's three-dimensional. It's hard to clean it without also leaving more fingerprints. Just do it to the best of your ability, because I got a couple tricks that will help get rid of and or hide light fingerprints. Don't forget to clean and shape the top and the bottom so that they look right, because they will be noticeable. Now, because you don't want your hard work to explode, take a pin, find the hole, make sure there's a hole in the top to let the air out. Once it's been baked, you can take a piece of denim and rub it all over the egg pretty hard. Believe it or not, this will get rid of some of the fingerprints. Now, this step is by no means necessary, but you can take some black acrylic paint, mix it in a bunch of water, and then drip it into the carvings to create a lot more depth and dimension. The way you do this is just drip it in and then clean it out with a Q-tip, kind of running it around the edges. That way, make sure the black really sticks to the edge of each carving and you don't have a giant pool that's gonna drip places and get on places you don't want to add depth to. So I recommend doing this to each carving and every line, including the jagged and the squiggle. I did 2 layers, just make sure you wait for each layer to completely dry before adding another. Once everything's dry, give it another brisk rub down with denim. Now it's time to glaze. I balanced my orb on a bottle so that it would actually sit upright without me having to mess with it, and then just kind of painted the top half, waited until that was dry, painted the bottom half, repeated that process a few times to give it a few good coats. The one thing about glazing is that you want to make sure you get into the carvings where that black acrylic paint is. Watered down acrylic paint is not known for staying power, but glue and glaze and Mod Podge, that is. Once everything's dry, you are done, and if you're like me, you can't quite stop petting the Precursor orb. It's very comforting.